Hello, this is Moreau Bernard with Read My Mind. If you could read my mind, love, what a tale my thoughts would tell. And by the way, please subscribe to the channel and please share the videos of Read My Mind. When does life begin? A well-known book says 40. A well-known radio program says 80. Some folks say it's mental, others say it's physical. But take the strange case of Mel Carlson, who gave a lot of thought to the matter. Mel felt as if he were floating on clouds in the deepest, most intense dark he had ever experienced. He tried opening his eyes, but nothing happened, only a sharp pain. Little bits of memory flashed back, and he tried to figure out what could have happened, where he was. The last thing he could remember was the little lab hidden back in the mountains in an old mine tunnel, remote, but only an hour's drive from the city. What had he been doing? Oh yes, arguing with Neil again. He even recalled the exact words. "Damn it, Mel," his partner had said. "We've gone about as far as possible working with animal brains. We've got to get a human one." "We can't," Mel had disagreed. "There'd be enough of an uproar if the papers got hold of what we've been doing with animals. If we did get someone in a hospital to agree to let us use his brain on death, they would close us up tighter than a drum. But our labs are too well hidden. They'd never know. It wouldn't work anyway. The brain might be damaged for lack of oxygen, and all of our work would go for nothing. Worse, it might indicate failure, where a fresh, healthy brain would mean success." "We'll never know unless we try," said Neil almost violently, dark eyes glittering. "Our funds aren't going to last forever." Mel had turned his back and was leaning over the tank where the latest brain, that from a dog, was lying immersed in the life-giving liquid, a thin, flickering line of light on the oscilloscope behind the tank, the only indication that the brain was alive. What had happened then? He thought hard, until a sharp pain and growing headache almost made him lose consciousness. Either he'd passed out or something had happened. Maybe the cave had collapsed, the concrete walls of their lab, although he didn't see how that could have happened. He became aware of voices, faint at first, then growing stronger. He strained to listen, and just when it appeared that the words would become distinct enough to understand, they faded away. He waited hopefully until they came back. This time, he could understand words and parts of sentences. "Connect this first and... No, be careful. Too much voltage would ruin everything, and we'd have to... Where does this connection go here?" The other voice boomed, and then, deep vibrations feeling as if they would shatter his brain. There was a frantic quality in the words. "No, no, you fool, don't!" A penetrating pain knifed through Mel's head, and he tried to scream but heard nothing but a loud buzzing. He welcomed the loss of consciousness as it blanketed him. He struggled back to consciousness once more, a voice calling over and over in a monotone. "Mel Carlson, Mel Carlson, can you hear me? Mel, Mel, Mel Carlson, can you hear me, Mel? He listened intently, recognizing it as one of the first voices he had heard. He tried to move, but could feel no response of legs or arms. It was like being buried alive, and he tried to call out for help. He must have lost his voice because he could still hear the same call. Mel Carlson, can you? It broke off abruptly, then came back triumphantly. You do hear me. Mel, I can see. Again, Mel tried to call out without success. The other warned quickly. Don't become alarmed. We're still working on your voice. Just try to rest. Mel suddenly realized that he'd been listening to Neil, and a wave of thankfulness swept over him. There had been a cave-in then, and he'd been injured. Neil was speaking again, a note of professional regret in his voice. I'm sorry it had to happen this way, but there was too much tied up in the project to lose now. A growing realization and horror began to seep through Mel's mind. Neil continued after a brief pause. The sine wave jumped. I see you must realize now. I had to do it, Mel. After all, you aren't dead, you know. Just your body is gone. Your brain may live for hundreds of years. Why, just think. You'll be able... Oblivion again claimed Mel. Once more, Mel was floating on clouds, and this time the sensation was exhilarating. He tried moving his arms and legs to see if he could swim through the velvety darkness, but failed. A faint glow began to appear ahead of him, and a low rumble of voices began to echo throughout his mind. Full realization of what had happened swept over him, and he struggled to retain his sanity. The voices were louder, and he recognized that of Neil, who was saying, He's conscious now. Easy on the voltage. Remember last time? A brief pause, then louder. Mel, I see that you hear me. Listen carefully. I've tried out several of my own theories. That's why you can hear. And in just a moment, I'm going to give you eyesight. We're having trouble with the voice. The light began growing in intensity and hurt his eyeballs. Mel remembered then, depressed, that he had no eyes of his own. Even at the thought, he tried to shut his eyes, which only caused his brain to ache more. He tried completely relaxing in an endeavor to capture the floating sensation once more. Ah, that's better, approved Neil's voice. I see that the brain wave is smoothed down. If you'll just accept what's happened, Mel, we should be able to work together. Figures began to form in the white mist. As they became stronger but out of focus, he saw Neil bent over a control panel, carefully making adjustments and glancing frequently at the leaping line of green light across the scope in front of him. He felt a surge of hate sweep through his brain and saw the green line jump violently. Neil's hand jumped instinctively toward a red-covered switch. At the same time, he flashed a glance towards a tank that was barely within the range of Mel's vision. He realized almost at once that it must be the same one in which his brain was resting. The full, sickening realization of what had happened hit him, and he almost went over the blackout line. Then Neil's face loomed square in his direction, and hate, the most intense he had ever experienced, brought the green line that represented his brain's output up to full level. His brain sent impulses out to the nerve ends that had controlled his arms and legs. They felt as if they were still attached to him, but paralyzed. His mind felt clearer and sharper now than it ever had before in his life. He determined to analyze his new mental capabilities carefully in the hope he would find a means of striking back. During the next few weeks, only his hatred for Neil enabled Mel to keep his sanity. The first empty feeling that the future could hold nothing for him but horror gave way to planning and scheming. His mechanical voice was perfected, operated by the nerve ends of his brain, much as his original vocal cords had functioned. It enabled him to now assist in his own rehabilitation by suggesting improvements or solutions to mechanical aids he could control. The steady growth or realization of his mental powers were amazing to Mel. He realized that they must have been inherent and in his subconscious all of the time. Only his loss of body brought them out now. That, plus the fact that he required practically no rest if the stimulants pumped into the tank were sufficient. This last was a clue to his use by Neil. It became apparent that his erstwhile partner planned on using him to the fullest possible extent. First, Neil brought in a problem concerning a new type of paint to absorb the rays of the sun and convert them into electrical energy. Not until he had studied the problem and given Neil the answer did Mel realize the full financial potentiality of his powers. He immediately brought up the subjects. "What about partnership agreement on profits?" he asked. "Profits?" repeated Neil with a nasty smile. "Why, where did you plan on going?" For once, Mel was glad that his voice was flat and devoid of all inflection. It kept the other from sensing the rage that made him want to do something violent. "You know what I mean," he insisted doggedly. "Unless you want to admit murder, we're still partners." Neil laughed and said, "That's right. Of course, I can draw any and all funds that I need, but if the authorities ever check on your disappearance, they'll find that a separate account has been opened in your name in the city. All you have to do is go in and withdraw it at any time you want to." He chuckled, then grew serious. "Don't get any ideas," he warned. "We've been spending most of the time during the past couple of months getting you in shape for your intended function, and I'm going to bring more and more problems into you." He explained further. "I've opened an engineering consultant service in the city, and this paint formula alone will bring us all the business we'll need." He pretended to be busy at one of the computers being installed, but Mel could see that he was glancing out of the corner of his eyes at the oscilloscope for indication of a brain reaction. Mel had learned several weeks ago that he could control the output of his brain, and had been careful to conceal the fact from Neil. His partner said, disappointment in his voice, "Doesn't my attitude bother you anymore?" Mel's mechanical voice rolled out. "When you destroyed my body, you destroyed all emotions. If that's the way you want to do things, that's the way it'll be. But the ethics, I know what would happen to me if you turned me over to the scientists. I'd be a freak and treated as such. I owe nothing to the world. Swell, teased Neil. This time his face twisted into a grimace of pleasure. I've got a lot of plans that you'll fit into. Experiments had been made with muscular control, and they discovered that Mel could govern an electrically powered table, controlled by shortwave radio. Another eye that could swing in a 360-degree circle had been mounted on it and broadcast its information to Mel's optical circuit. A mechanical arm had also been installed on it, and Mel spent long night hours when the lab was quiet, perfecting his control over it. Before long, he was as much, if not more, proficient with it as he had been with his own arms. He began laying his plans. The first thing he needed was a weapon. Getting his control card out of the cubicle was easy, since Jenkins, the only assistant allowed in the entire laboratory, had left his key ring lying on the table one morning. It had been but the work of a moment to wheel over, pick them up, and then conceal them. Jenkins had spent a frantic hour in search, but finally went into the machine shop to make up a new set. He had first cautioned Mel against letting Neil know, almost fawning in his gratitude when Mel promised. He searched the entire lab the first 2 nights, but discovered that Neil had taken the revolver he had kept in a drawer of his own desk. It would take too long to try and machine another one, although their machine shop had proven its capability of turning out anything. A knife he discarded as too clumsy for his means of control. He then carefully considered steel darts shot from a tube by compressed air or carbon dioxide, but reluctantly abandoned that idea also, since he had the machine's limitations as well as advantages. He'd have to begin thinking less like a human. So the first thing to base the weapon on would be the material most plentiful in the lab. That was electricity. Once determined on the line of his endeavors, he briefly marveled again on the still unexplored potentialities of his brain. The weapon would be mounted on his own card, and electricity could either be broadcast or self-contained. For mobility, he decided on a power pack. The weapon itself evolved so easily that he wondered why no one had thought of it before now. Special type condensers built a battery charge up to over 1 million volts for a split second. This charge, invisible until it hit an object more solid than air, was contained in a very narrow beam by strong screens of opposite polarity. The entire sequence of operation was almost instantaneous, and the bolt was more in the nature of an electrical projectile than a continuous beam. He decided that the unit, resembling a flashlight, could be mounted in a concealed spot under his eye, so that it could be fired at whatever he might be looking at. Join me for the next video. Join me for the next video. Read my mind. Join me for the next video of Read My Mind, and please subscribe to the channel, and please share the videos. Read My Mind. See you. Join me for the next video of Read My Mind. I'll see you then. Bye for now. Bye.